On July 28, 2018, the police arrested Christina, Angelina, and Maria Khachaturian, but nobody could foresee the wave of public outrage that would follow, dividing public opinion in Russia, reminiscent of the polarization seen in the O.J. Simpson case in the United States. The story of the Khachaturian sisters and their father, Mikhail, began in Azerbaijan, where Mikhail was born in 1962 into a conservative Armenian family deeply rooted in the Orthodox Church and Caucasus traditions. However, history forced them out of their homeland. In February 1988, the Supreme Soviet of the Nagorno-Karabakh Autonomous Region called for unification with the Armenian SSR, a move that sparked protests and violence in Azerbaijan and Armenia, leading to ethnic clashes in Baku, with Armenians like Mikhail's family fleeing the violence. Mikhail and his family escaped to Moscow, planning to move to America, but family issues delayed their plans, and they stayed in the Russian capital. There, in 1996, he met Aurelia Dunduk, who became his wife and the mother of his children. However, their marriage was far from blissful. Aurelia recounted that Mikhail hit her just before their wedding ceremony, and the abuse continued for 20 years, unabashedly, even in front of others. The Khachaturians lived in a cramped two-bedroom apartment with Mikhail's mother, sister, and nephew, at times housing up to 10 people as Mikhail decided. To friends and acquaintances, Mikhail appeared devoutly religious, adhering to strict religious norms and superstitions, imposing harsh restrictions on his family, especially on Aurelia, whom he barred from working and restricted from going out. The patriarchal views held by the Khachaturians dictated that Aurelia, as a dutiful wife, should stoically endure the beatings. In this oppressive environment, the family grew. Aurelia was just 19 when she became pregnant with her first child, Sergei. Christina was born in 1999, followed by Angelina and then Maria in 2001. Sergei first experienced Mikhail's harsh treatment, which continued with severe beatings under the guise of discipline. After Sergei was thrown out at 16, a similar fate befell Aurelia in 2015. Mikhail kicked her out, forbade her from seeing their daughters, and threatened her life if she tried to contact them. Terrified, Aurelia stayed away, knowing all too well her husband's violent nature. Over 20 years, she suffered abuse and sought police help to no avail. In desperation, she even harmed herself with a knife, but still received no aid. With Aurelia and the eldest son gone, Mikhail's violence intensified towards his daughters, burdening them with unbearable tasks, regular beatings, and cruel treatment, including forced intimacy. He demanded their constant availability, summoning them with a bell at any hour to serve him, fetching water, food, or whatever he demanded, asserting his dominance and control to the extreme. Furthermore, he subjected them to sexual abuse whenever he chose. Following these events, in 2016, Christina, one of the sisters, attempted to take her own life but was resuscitated by doctors. He isolated the girls, negatively affecting their schooling. Maria and Angelina, who were in the same grade, were rarely allowed to attend school in recent years because their father forced them to stay home. The sisters later reported that their father constantly threatened them with various weapons and even installed a camera to watch them when he was away from home. In a shocking example of the mental torment they endured, he forced them to eat the family dog's hair. Shockingly, all this happened in the 21st century, in plain view of neighbors, teachers, and the girl's friends and parents who witnessed Mikhail's violent behavior. Yet, except for the school psychologist who tried to discuss their family situation, the community and school staff chose not to intervene, offering no significant support, a stance not uncommon in Russia. In a broader context, in 2017, under pressure from the Russian Orthodox Church and traditionalists, the parliament passed the slapping law, decriminalizing domestic violence and reducing it to an administrative offense. Thus, it was unsurprising when the psychologist's attempt to discuss the matter with Mikhail was cut short by threats, as he guarded his family affairs closely. By 2018, the Khachaturian sisters were virtually imprisoned in their home, suffering their father's physical and psychological abuse, a reality unknown to their mother and brother but easily deduced from their prior experiences. Tragically, these abuses were normalized by their grandmother and the paternal family, who believed Mikhail was protecting them to ensure they lived honorably. On the night of July 27, 2018, after returning home from medical treatment, 57-year-old Mikhail became enraged over extra expenses and the disorder in the apartment, which he had demanded his daughters manage. He called them one by one, scolded them in a room, and sprayed pepper spray in their faces, causing Christina to faint from a severe asthma attack. After punishing his daughters, Mikhail went to sleep on a couch. At that moment, Angelina and Maria decided they could no longer endure the abuse. One night, while their father slept on the couch, 18-year-old Angelina quietly approached and struck him in the head with a hammer. Then, 17-year-old Maria wounded him with a sharp household object he often used to threaten them. Despite their efforts, Mikhail, strong as he was, woke up and tried to fend them off and escape the apartment. Hearing the commotion, 19-year-old Christina, the eldest sister, grabbed the same can of pepper spray her father had used and sprayed him in the face to stop him from catching one of her sisters. Amid the family struggle, Angelina took the sharp weapon from Maria and dealt the final blow to their father, who had tormented them for so long. Minutes later, the three girls made cuts on their arms to simulate defensive wounds, as if their father had attacked them. They then called the police and an ambulance. Upon arrival at the apartment building, Moscow authorities found Mikhail's body, with the autopsy report noting multiple stab wounds, including cuts on the chest and neck. During the search of the premises, police confiscated numerous weapons owned by Mikhail, including a knife, hammer, crossbow, rifle, 2 air pistols, a traumatic weapon, 16 bullets, and 16 darts. Traumatic weapons, firing rubber or pepper projectiles, cause intense pain but are not usually fatal. The next day, Christina, Angelina, and Maria were arrested as the primary suspects in their father's death. During questioning, they confessed to the crime, citing years of physical, moral, and sexual abuse by Mikhail as their motive, leading investigators to note the hostile personal relationship and prolonged moral suffering caused by the father. On July 29th, the trio was charged with murder without aggravating circumstances. The sisters, Christina, Angelina, and Maria Khachaturian, labeled their father a sex-addicted villain who systematically subjected them to cruel and inhuman treatment and used them as slaves for years. During the investigation, they revealed that he had sexually assaulted all 3 sisters and forced them into incestuous relations against their will. Testimonies from friends and family corroborated over 10 incidents of sexual violence, and a medical examination confirmed the sisters had suffered sexual abuse. Maria, the youngest sister, was declared mentally unstable at the time of the incident and sent for compulsory medical treatment. On July 30, 2018, a Moscow court held a pre-trial detention hearing, extending their detention by 72 hours. During the proceedings, the charges were escalated from simple murder to murder under the Russian Penal Code, indicating a harsher expected sentence. On July 31st, representatives from Moscow's Public Monitoring Commission visited the sisters, who reported that their legal rights had been violated post-arrest. They were not informed of their rights, nor provided with legal counsel during questioning. In early August, the investigation proceeded with weapon examinations and interviews with the sisters' acquaintances. Surveillance footage from the Khachaturian home was also reviewed, and a crime scene reenactment was conducted. Prosecutors concluded that the sisters acted in concert, with the youngest, Maria, striking their father at least 35 times with a sharp object. However, their defense lawyers argued for their innocence, emphasizing the constant life-threatening environment imposed by their father, which left them isolated and desperate. On August 2nd, Moscow's court extended their pre-trial detention by 2 months. 4 days later, the Central Office of the Investigative Committee took over the case. Russia's Human Rights Commissioner deemed the judicial decision excessive, prompting an appeal from the defense. While in detention, the sisters had the opportunity to study and speak with a psychologist, providing them with support previously denied by their father. By mid-August, the investigation acknowledged Mikhail's immoral actions and confirmed the psychological and sexual abuse. In early September, a mental health examination found the youngest sister unaware of her actions, leading to her transfer to the prison's psychiatric ward. The assessment revealed that the other 2 sisters were mentally healthy, yet they were diagnosed with battered woman syndrome. Despite an initial rejection of house arrest by the court, sisters Maria and Angelina were released from detention by the end of September, with a 3-month ban on using the internet and contacting certain relatives and the media. Russian media offered varying accounts of the events, but unanimously reported the sisters had endured long-term physical and sexual abuse by their father. As the court proceedings progressed, the public learned through journalists about the sisters' lifelong suffering. Media outlets released audio recordings and correspondence of the girls, evidencing the extensive violence they endured from Mikhail. Their defense strategy refuted the notion of premeditated conspiracy, focusing instead on the spontaneous nature of their actions, driven by the emotional turmoil they faced. Texts from Mikhail's phone, shared by their lawyer on social media, showed him threatening their lives and forcing them into sexual acts, including a specific threat in April 2018 to beat and kill them, accusing them of sexual relations with a friend and vowing they would die dishonorably. Transcripts from the interrogations painted a grim picture of long-standing mental, physical, and sexual abuse. A circulated video showed Mikhail yelling at and hitting his daughters, blaming them for the apartment's disarray, footage he recorded himself. Simultaneously, the Public Oversight Commission investigated local child protection agencies, following claims from the sisters' lawyers that these organizations failed to act on reports about Mikhail from the girls' school teachers. Although Mikhail had been repeatedly reported to the police, they denied receiving such reports posthumously, attributed by the girl's mother, Aurelia, to Mikhail's connections with local police officials, a claim later corroborated by investigative journalists. Activists noted that women risk severe prison sentences for defending themselves against abusers. In the sisters' case, lawyers and activists argued they were compelled to act in self-defense. In a country where penalties for domestic violence have been softened in recent years, victims are often left with no choice but to defend themselves. However, not everyone believed in the innocence of the young sisters, facing significant skepticism within the conservative sectors of Russian society. The teenagers lacked support from their own family, with several relatives of Mikhail defending him, calling the sisters liars and suggesting the alleged domestic violence was merely a reaction to their provocations. These relatives claimed the sisters had financial motives for killing him. Despite the sisters renouncing their father's inheritance, their grandmother revoked Christina's apartment registration. Their cousin claimed they lied about the beatings to tarnish their father's reputation. An aunt, sister of Mikhail, asserted there was no evidence of sexual violence, citing medical tests supposedly proving two of the sisters were virgins, and insinuated that the third sister had a secret boyfriend. The Khachaturian sisters' case sparked widespread public outcry and was extensively debated on state television. In January, the prosecutor's office confirmed the defense's allegations of the sisters suffering constant beatings, humiliations, threats, and physical and sexual violence, leading to a defensive response. Prosecutors then instructed the investigative committee to reclassify the case from premeditated murder to necessary self-defense. One of the lawyers told the state news agency that this reclassification would likely end the criminal investigation against the sisters, who faced up to 20 years in prison for premeditated murder. However, in a surprising twist, the prosecutor, who initially recommended downgrading the case, confirmed in March that premeditated murder charges would be pressed against the sisters, with no explanation for the drastic change. On June 14, 2019, the charges were elevated to premeditated murder, with penalties ranging from 8 to 20 years. The prosecution cited the father's violent actions as the murder motive. In response, the lawyers appealed to the head of the investigative committee, insisting on recognizing self-defense as the primary motive. Investigators sought to extend the sisters' ban on internet use, communication with relatives, and media statements for another month. This ban was extended until July 28th and further prolonged. The case, widely covered by the media, led to large-scale public protests and support demonstrations in Moscow, St. Petersburg, and other cities, with activists demanding the reclassification of the case. The sisters gained support from celebrities and journalists, highlighting the significant public backing and outcry against the perceived injustices they faced. However, the march supporting the sisters faced opposition from male activists of a conservative Russian organization, which viewed the young women as cold-blooded criminals. 4 individuals were detained for causing disturbances, 3 of whom were men from this conservative group. Critics, meanwhile, pointed to the sisters' seemingly carefree images on social media. Initially, public pressure seemed to influence the case, leading to an early defense breakthrough on July 11th, with the investigative committee planning to posthumously charge Mikhail for torture, sexual violence, and forced sexual acts. However, by the end of 2019, despite evidence of abuse by their father, the investigative committee announced premeditated murder charges, arguing the attack was planned, evidenced by the sisters coordinating the assault while their father slept and allegedly preparing the weapon beforehand. The sisters' lawyers countered that Russian penal law allows for self-defense not only during immediate aggression, but also in ongoing crimes. A 2019 survey found that 47% of Russian women and 33% of Russian men felt the sisters' actions were justified. In early 2020, the Deputy Prosecutor General refused to sign the accusation against the sisters, suggesting the charges should be reclassified as necessary self-defense. Although investigators objected, the General Prosecutor ordered further psychological and psychiatric assessments. By May 13th, additional investigations were completed and the murder charges were re-evaluated. In July, the General Prosecutor approved the indictment, leading to the trial's commencement in Moscow on July 31st. The older sisters, Christina and Angelina, were tried together, while Maria, a minor at the time of the crime, was charged after turning 18. At the trial's start, the prosecution sought a communication ban on the accused for at least 6 months. The sisters were restricted from accessing the internet, speaking to the press, contacting trial participants, and joining public events like demonstrations supporting them. In August 2020, the Moscow City Court approved a jury trial for Christina and Angelina's case. Maria was declared unfit for trial, with an expectation that prosecutors would seek medical treatment for her in a separate proceeding. Amid this complex legal situation, with 3 accused, 2 separate trials, and conflicting legal opinions, a significant twist occurred. On December 4, 2020, Moscow's court ruled the investigators' refusal to initiate criminal proceedings against Mikhail Khachaturian illegal, mandating the start of legal actions against him. Following this, in early February 2021, the Moscow City Court sent Angelina and Christina's case back to the prosecutors, pending legal assessment of their father's actions. In March, a posthumous case against Mikhail opened in Moscow's district court for charges of sexual aggression, coercion, and torment, recognizing the sisters as victims. The investigation found Mikhail had manipulated people through intimidation, violence, cruelty, and humiliation, engaging in physical and sexual violence, and exhibiting a disorder or perversion. He also distributed explicit intimate material of his daughters. However, the lawyer representing the deceased challenged the sexual assault charges, citing a lack of biological evidence and suggesting the daughters could have sent the explicit material from their father's phone, arguing that it was the investigators' responsibility to prove Mikhail sent the videos. By May 29, 2022, the investigation against Mikhail concluded, accusing him of sexual violence, assault, and distributing explicit material. The trial unearthed horrifying details, including forcing his daughters to dig their own graves, highlighting the severe physical and mental harm inflicted on them. This development paved the way for the potential exoneration of the 3 sisters. After a lengthy legal battle, they were finally recognized as victims, offering them a glimmer of hope for regaining their freedom, as their crime might be reclassified as self-defense. However, a definitive ruling in Mikhail's trial has yet to be issued. As of April 2024, Christina and Angelina were still under house arrest, awaiting the conclusion of their father's trial. Women's rights advocates argue that the sisters should receive psychological rehabilitation rather than prison sentences. The possibility of dropping charges against all sisters has emerged following a new psychiatric evaluation, which revealed that all of them were suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder at the time of the incident. While the Khachaturian sisters await their verdict, their defense lawyers hope their case will be reconsidered by the judiciary and set a precedent in Russian law for the self-defense of abuse victims. The case has sparked significant public outcry and has been a hot topic on Russian television for months, focusing on the abusive father's death and the Moscow police's criticized role for not acting against Mikhail following his ex-wife's reports of physical violence. It was exposed that law enforcement often treats domestic violence as a family issue, providing little to no support to the victims. And there you have it, dear viewers. That concludes today's episode of Unreal True Crime. Remember to subscribe and hit the like button if you appreciate my work. Good night, and I'll see you next time with another criminal story. "20 years ago, Rachel, a 21-year-old, was making the 20-minute journey to her home from her parents' house in the early hours of New Year's Day 2003. She had spent the evening celebrating at a pub with friends and family, She had stopped off at her parents' house in Hall Road, North Hull, to get changed into her trainers before making the 20-minute walk back to her flat in Saxe Court, Orchard Park. Her mother pleaded with her not to go because it was too late. But her beloved kittens, Speedy Tomato and Batman, were home alone after her boyfriend had decided to go to a party. Rachel promised to call when she got home. She never did. Rachel Morin was born on January 17, 1981, in England, and was the youngest of 4 siblings, having 2 sisters and 1 brother. They all lived together in their hometown. From an early age, Rachel developed a keen interest in music and dance, particularly ballet. She excelled academically in school and later attended a local college to study information technology. However, she eventually decided to focus on her passion for dance. In college, Rachel met a young man named Mark, and they soon started dating. They decided to move in together and rented an apartment in a quiet residential area, which was only a kilometer away from Rachel's parents' home, allowing her to visit them frequently. Rachel also found a job at a local bakery, where she enjoyed decorating cakes. This experience sparked her interest in pursuing a culinary education. In December 2002, when Rachel was 21, she and Mark adopted 2 kittens. They were both very attentive to the pets, ensuring they were never left alone for long periods. As a result, Rachel and Mark always planned their activities to ensure someone was home to care for the animals. This included their New Year's Eve plans, where Mark was to visit his parents and return in the evening, while Rachel planned to go to a bar with her brother to celebrate. On the night of December 31st, Rachel met up with her brother, and they went to a bar, joined by some friends. After midnight, Rachel and her brother left the bar and arrived at their parents' house around 1:20 a.m. Before going to bed, Rachel decided to call Mark to check on him but found he was not home. She reached him on his mobile phone, and he informed her that he was at a party with friends. Disappointed that Mark had left the house and the kittens alone, Rachel decided to go back to their apartment instead of staying at her parents' house. Her mother tried to dissuade her from leaving due to the late hour and concerns for her safety, even though the apartment was only a kilometer away. After a long discussion, Rachel left for home, promising to call her mother upon arrival. However, after waiting for about an hour and a half without receiving a call, Rachel's mother tried to reach her both on her mobile phone and at the apartment but got no response. Rachel Morin's mother grew increasingly worried when she could not reach her daughter, suspecting that Rachel might have gone to the party where her boyfriend was and hence was not answering the calls. After trying to contact her until 4:30 a.m., the mother decided to go to sleep. She woke up around 10 a.m. and found her husband on the phone, hoping he was talking to Rachel. However, it was their eldest daughter on the line, who had been unable to reach Rachel all morning and was very worried. Realizing that Rachel had not returned home, the family began to panic. They tried calling her again, and after some time, Mark answered. He was surprised when asked if Rachel was home. He said he had returned around 7 a.m. and found that Rachel wasn't there. Assuming she had stayed at her parents' house, he didn't think much of it and went to sleep. According to Mark, there were no signs that Rachel had been in the apartment. Her belongings were not there. The bed was as he left it, and the kittens had not been fed. This escalated the family's panic. The family called Rachel's friends and other relatives, but no one had seen her that night. Subsequently, Rachel's parents decided to inform the police. Although Rachel was almost 22 years old and the police might typically wait before starting a search for a missing adult, they decided to begin the search immediately in this case. They inspected her apartment and interviewed all her family members and friends. The police quickly ruled out the possibility that Rachel had left of her own free will, given her background and the accounts of her loved ones. During the investigation, Rachel's mother recalled a moment from the night Rachel disappeared. When Rachel was leaving for her apartment, they had a discussion literally at the doorstep, standing with the door open as her mother tried to convince her to stay. At one point, an unknown man passed by the street. Rachel's mother even considered asking him to accompany her daughter home, but decided against it. After receiving a basic description of the man seen near Rachel Moran's location, the police began searching for him, as he was headed in the same direction as Rachel shortly after her departure. This individual might have witnessed something relevant. Police units were alerted while the search for other clues continued. Investigators started scrutinizing Mark, Rachel's boyfriend. First, it was discovered that there had been an argument between them that night when Rachel found out he had gone to a party. Secondly, during his interactions with the police, Mark did not appear distressed despite his girlfriend's disappearance. These factors led the investigators to consider the possibility of his involvement in her disappearance, prompting them to verify his alibi. Mark stated he returned from the party after 6 a.m. The police confirmed his statement by speaking with people present at the party. Rachel's relatives also insisted that Mark would never harm her. Investigators requested Rachel's mobile operator and bank data and found that she had not used her phone or bank card since her disappearance. At that time, mobile phone geolocation tracking and cellular tower data were not sophisticated enough to be useful, especially over short distances. The police decided to obtain all surveillance camera recordings within a 10-kilometer radius of her route. Patrols were dispatched to each store, and residents in these areas were interviewed, hoping someone might have security cameras installed. Soon, they spotted Rachel on one of the cameras, just a few hundred meters from her residential complex, confirming she was heading home and not elsewhere. The search was intensified in this area, involving search dogs, helicopters, and dozens of officers combing streets, fields, and bodies of water. Streams and artificial channels were drained in the search, but these efforts yielded no results. As time passed, the police increasingly suspected that Rachel might no longer be alive, but the search continued on a larger scale. 2 weeks later, a concerning clue emerged. One of the channels near Rachel's apartment was drained, and her shoe, which she had worn when leaving her mother's house, was found. The following day, a trash bag was discovered in the same channel, containing a woman's purse with cosmetics, a mobile phone, and other items, including Rachel Moran's passport. These findings led Rachel's family and the investigators to believe she was probably deceased, and the police continued scouring the channels. There was a possibility that an unknown perpetrator had disposed of Rachel's body there, but further searches led to no additional discoveries. In the subsequent days, detectives dedicated even more effort to the case, deciding to resort to a popular tactic in England. The police found a woman who resembled Rachel Moran and dressed her in clothes similar to those Rachel wore on the night of her disappearance. They asked her to follow the same route Rachel took, and this reenactment was recorded and broadcast on local television channels. The purpose of this experiment was to find witnesses who might have seen Rachel on the night she disappeared but didn't think much of it, or had simply forgotten. The visual recreation of the scene was successful in jogging memories, and several people contacted the police with their observations after the broadcast. While these testimonies were ultimately not very helpful to the case, the detectives did gain some significant leads. In addition to witnesses, owners of surveillance cameras in the area also approached the police. Initially, the police had received most of these recordings, but some had been overlooked and proved to be fruitful. The administration of a school located about 150 meters from Rachel's apartment provided footage from the night in question. The quality was poor, but the police saw a woman heading towards the apartment complex and, seconds later, someone following her. They suspected this individual might be the unknown offender who could have attacked Rachel. However, the poor quality of the footage prevented identification of any distinguishing features. The police theorized that if the person responsible for Rachel's disappearance was this individual, they couldn't have transported her body too far without a car. They assumed the perpetrator lived in the area and decided to attempt to search every house within a 2-kilometer radius. This required residents' permission and considerable time, so over 100 officers were involved, knocking on doors and requesting to inspect properties. The search began on January 28th, with officers divided into groups, each accompanied by a specialist in property inspection. Hours into the search, one of the teams encountered something alarming at the last unit. The police were allowed inside by a man who answered the door, but initially found nothing suspicious. Before leaving, an officer noticed a small closet used for storing garbage, which was locked. The man couldn't recall where the key was, but eventually found it. When the officers opened the closet, they discovered numerous trash bags, empty boxes, and other objects. As they cleared the clutter, an officer noticed a human foot in one of the bags. Upon further inspection, they realized they had found the body of Rachel Moran. Wrapped in a blanket and tightly squeezed into the closet, which was very low, the officers were astounded at how the criminal managed to fit a human body in there. They immediately arrested the apartment owner, 23-year-old Michael Little, and his friend who was present during the visit. Little reacted calmly to his arrest, while his friend was shocked and confused about why they were being detained. After the arrest, the officers called the chief detective and waited for his arrival. They took Little's friend to the station while Little remained in the apartment with an officer, waiting for the next team. The officer decided to engage Little in conversation, and to his surprise, Little almost immediately began confessing in detail. Little expressed relief at being found, saying he had long wanted to tell someone. He narrated the sequence of events leading to the girl's death, but the officer found his version dubious. According to Little, on New Year's Eve, he saw Rachel on the street, approached her, and talked to her, offering to go to his apartment. Rachel agreed, and they went to his place where they drank a bit. Then they argued over something unspecified. Little claimed he went to another room and, upon returning to the kitchen, found Rachel with her back to him, holding a knife. When she turned towards him and cut his hand, he panicked, grabbed a kitchen knife, and struck her, causing her death. The officer doubted the truthfulness of this story, as it seemed quite illogical. Nevertheless, he recorded Little's confession, and Little was soon taken to the station. During the interrogation, Little maintained his claim of self-defense. When asked why he didn't call the police, Little said he was scared and thought no one would believe him, so he decided to hide the body in his closet. Further investigation into Little's background revealed a significant criminal history. From a young age, he was caught stealing and committing other minor offenses. He was expelled from school several times, failing to obtain even a basic education. Little barely worked, stayed at home, and consumed alcohol and drugs. His acquaintances mentioned that Little often fantasized about meeting different women. He once even claimed he was dating a very tall and beautiful blonde girl. Although Little's friends knew he was not actually in any relationship, this detail caught the detective's attention. Rachel matched the description of the type of woman Little often fantasized about, approximately the same height and blonde hair. The detectives hypothesized that Little might have chosen Rachel as his victim based on these characteristics. They also established that Rachel did not know Little, despite living on nearby streets. The investigators reconstructed the timeline of that night and found that Little had been with his friends on the evening of December 31st, preparing to celebrate the new year. However, Little left their company in a rage because the girl he was trying to flirt with had left with his friend. He then headed to another party and left shortly after midnight, following a route that intersected with Rachel's path. Upon reviewing all available facts, the detectives came to an alarming conclusion. They recalled the stranger who passed by Rachel and her mother while the latter was pleading with her daughter not to walk home alone. The police suspected that this man was Little, a theory indirectly confirmed by surveillance camera footage. The recording showed a man resembling Little passing by shortly before Rachel, and in a subsequent recording, an unknown man was seen walking behind her. If this man was Little, he must have stopped somewhere to wait for Rachel to pass and then began following her. This scenario contradicted Little's own story. Further contradictions emerged after medical experts presented their report. Rachel's body had 27 stab wounds inflicted with great force, and she had no defensive wounds, contrary to Little's claim of a fight between them. Additionally, some of the wounds were inflicted from behind and no cuts were found on Little's hands. These facts unequivocally indicated that his story did not match reality. Based on all the available data, the detectives formulated a more plausible version of events. On that night, Little, feeling spurned from being rejected at the first party, passed by Rachel's mother's house. Hearing part of their conversation, he understood that Rachel would be walking home alone. She fit the type of woman he fantasized about, so he decided to attack her or try to talk to her. He advanced a bit, stepped off the main street and waited for Rachel to pass, then began following her. The situation could have developed in two scenarios. Either he attacked her immediately or attempted to flirt with her. In the scenario where Rachel might have ignored Little and walked away, there were several reasons for this. Firstly, she had a boyfriend. Secondly, she would not go to the home of a stranger who approached her on the street in the middle of the night. And thirdly, Rachel was very concerned about her kittens. Upon learning that her boyfriend had left them alone all night, she was focused on getting home as quickly as possible. The most likely scenario was that Little attacked Rachel when she was close to her home and dragged her to his apartment. Criminologists found evidence supporting this theory. There were mud stains on the back of Rachel's legs, indicating she had been dragged along the ground. They also determined that the murder did not occur in the kitchen, but in the hallway, where most of the bloodstains were found and which the criminal tried to clean. Despite all this, forensic experts determined that Rachel had been sexually assaulted, and Little's DNA was found on her body. This indicated that Rachel could have been dead by the time these events occurred. Based on all this evidence, murder charges were filed against Little on January 31st. However, he had hired a lawyer by then and retracted his initial statements, claiming he had not killed anyone. Eventually, the case went to trial in October, where Little's lawyers presented a new version of events. Little now claimed that his friend was the actual murderer. This was the same friend who was arrested with him on the day Rachel's body was discovered but was later released due to a lack of evidence linking him to the case. According to Little, he returned home early in the morning and found his friend and Rachel there. He claimed his friend had met Rachel and decided to go to his apartment because he had the keys. The three of them drank together, and then Rachel and Little went to the bedroom and had sexual relations. Shortly after, his friend burst into the room, angry, feeling sympathy for the girl, and enraged upon discovering their relationship. He grabbed a knife and stabbed Rachel multiple times, then threatened Little. Little demanded that his friend help him clean up the blood and never speak of what happened. Otherwise, he threatened to kill not only Little, but also his loved ones. As one might expect, no one believed this story. It contradicted the evidence and common sense. All indications pointed to Little as the real murderer, with no evidence implicating his friend. The trial concluded fairly quickly since the defense could not present any evidence to refute their client's guilt. As a result, Little was found guilty of murder and sentenced to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole after 25 years. If his parole application is approved, he could be released at the age of 58. Rachel's murder was a devastating blow to all her family members, but her older sister, who suffered from diabetes, was particularly affected. The stress of the situation severely impacted her health. After a long struggle, she passed away in 2010, and her family blames Little for her death as well. Thus, the actions of this criminal led to 2 tragic losses. And that's the end of today's case. As always, I appreciate your support for my work. If you subscribe, like, and share this video, it will help me continue creating content. This was another episode of Unreal True Crime. See you soon. From the outside, John Parker's life in upscale Crown Point, Indiana appeared to be picture perfect. Married with kids, he and his wife Judy ran a very successful business selling Kirby vacuums, but appearances can be deceiving. On April 17, 2003, Judy called 911 to report that John had been shot outside their car. She told authorities she heard 2 gunshots and saw an unidentified figure in black ran from the scene. Little is known about the early life of John Parker. It's scarcely mentioned that he was born in 1970, had at least 1 sibling, and lived in Indiana, United States. He came from a middle-class family and was always an entrepreneurial young man with a desire for independence, self-improvement, and a hunger to take on the world. Therefore, it's not surprising that immediately after graduating from high school, he sought ways to earn money and, according to his brother, his first job was as a waiter's assistant in a restaurant, though he didn't last long there. For reasons unknown, John became angry at work and quit. However, this did not deter his ambitions, and sooner rather than later, he found a new job that not only allowed him more independence in his tasks, but also led him to discover his true calling: sales. John began working as a door-to-door salesman for Kirby vacuum cleaners. Initially, his family mocked him, but in a short time, John proved to everyone that he had found his direction in life. In fact, by the end of his first year, he was practically the company's #1 salesman in the area and announced he wouldn't settle for just that. Working long hours, from 12 to 16 hours a day, he became not only a sales leader whose achievements were recognized at company meetings, but also a guide for other salespeople who found new ideas, inspiration, and a role model in him. It was during this time that he met 20-year-old Judy, a young girl who was born in October 1969 and lived in Texas in a low-income family of 3 children. She was very outgoing, and even though John was not looking to hire more salespeople at the time, Judy convinced him that she was the best in the sales field. Despite her young age, she was not a shy girl. In fact, she was a fully grown woman who, with her parents' consent, had married at 14 and was divorced with 2 children, Christina and Daniel Hicks, by the time she met John. John decided to give this determined applicant a chance and became her mentor in vacuum cleaner sales. Judy not only earned a place in the sales force led by John, but also won the heart of her boss, and sometime later they embarked on a romantic relationship. John's life could not have been better. He had a well-earned reputation as an excellent salesman and trainer, and also had Judy's support in life and work. With these foundations, he decided to start his own business in Michigan, becoming a sales and service operator for Kirby vacuum cleaners. He also offered training sessions for salespeople, passing on his personal secret and the enthusiasm that had made him a star in the sector. His company was recognized as one of the top in the area, and John always highlighted that he had achieved this success thanks to Judy's support. In 1992, with his professional life resolved, the couple got married, and in the following years, they dedicated themselves to demonstrating what a good salesperson could achieve in life. The couple had 2 daughters, Tiffany and Erica, bringing the number of children in the family to 4. They moved residences several times, always to better locations, and the children began to enjoy the benefits earned through the hard work of John and Judy. Initially, he had no issues with his wife's children. Christina was a sweet little girl, and Daniel was somewhat hyperactive and mischievous. The Parkers enjoyed a good home, excellent schools for the children, high-end cars, and frequent vacations. John was amassing a significant fortune and didn't want to hide it. On the contrary, he used it as an incentive for the young salespeople he trained, showing them what could be achieved through hard work. However, as time passed and Judy's children entered their teenage years, problems began. Christina's choice of friends was terrible, as she chose those with the worst behavior and engaged in drinking with them. Allegedly, according to some sources, she also used drugs. Meanwhile, 13-year-old Daniel was not on a good path either and seemed to be angry and poorly accompanied all the time. On one occasion, while with a group of friends, Daniel took John's car and drove around the neighborhood, destroying many of the mailbox posts. The next day, John went from house to house paying the owners for the damage caused to prevent them from reporting the boy to the police. Around this time, John was also called to his stepson's school to receive a complaint about the boy's bad behavior. It appears that on this occasion, John ended up hitting the young man, which of course generated tension in the relationship. After 9 years together, Judy finally took her family to Texas so they could see the humble place where she had grown up and meet one of her brothers who still lived there. During this trip, Judy complained to her brother that her marriage was failing and that John mistreated her children. The truth was that Judy, far from recognizing that her older children were on the wrong path, sided with them, which of course heated up what seemed to be a pressure cooker. If everything was already bad, things worsened when John began to suspect that his wife was being unfaithful with an employee of his company. True to his way of solving problems, John was not a man to sit and stew over a problem, but a man of action. To leave no room for doubt, he installed cameras in various parts of the office and finally obtained irrefutable proof that confirmed his suspicions. At that moment, John's world collapsed, and his previously cheerful and cordial behavior took a 180-degree turn. He began to drink, and under the influence of alcohol, he not only had terrible arguments with Judy, but also became rough towards his children. His daughter Tiffany received a beating with a belt when her teacher informed her father that she had not brought her homework to school. When the teacher saw the marks from the beating the next day, she called social services to report the incident. Before they arrived, John made it clear to the 4 kids that if they wanted to continue enjoying the luxurious life they had been living up to that moment, it was better to say nothing about the beating. Indeed, Tiffany blamed her stepbrother Daniel for what had happened, and he did not deny it. However, John's bad mood didn't only affect his family. His employees and even the company's clients suffered from the betrayed husband's outbursts of rage. Seeking to put distance between his wife and her lover, he decided to move the family to an exclusive area in Crown Point, Indiana. Despite still being in love with Judy and hoping that by removing her from temptation they could have a fresh start, things did not improve. While Judy began to improve her appearance by losing weight and changing her look, John let his beard grow, started smoking. His wardrobe was reduced to jeans, and he was constantly distracted. The business suffered as a result of his state, ending up almost bankrupt and having to sell his boat to stay afloat. Rumors circulated in the office that Judy was having an affair with Jeff, John's right-hand man. Though it was unclear if the rumors were true, they undoubtedly fueled more disagreements. At a certain point, Judy informed him that she had decided to divorce, but it wouldn't be that simple. John felt that he had given everything to his wife, pulled her out of poverty, accepted her children, showered her with luxuries, and above all, loved her to the point of idolatry. With that same passion turned into resentment, he began to cut off all his wife's sources of money. He made it clear that if she left, she would leave with nothing, and his secret weapon was the recording of her infidelity with the office employee. This was the scenario at the beginning of 2003, and of course, the tensions between the couple affected the children, whose behavior went from bad to worse. Even Tiffany spent the holidays grounded because she and a friend had started a fire on school grounds. The end of the arguments came on Thursday, April 17, 2003, when John and Judy went out to dinner alone at a restaurant, possibly trying to find a solution to their situation, or maybe just trying to tone down the confrontation. After dinner, they called home to check on the kids and announced they would return shortly. At that moment, Christina asked them to stop by the office because she had left a school notebook there. Leaving the restaurant, they headed to the company, and John took the opportunity to bring the leftover dinner to Jeff, who was supposedly working late. The couple arrived at the office in a deserted industrial area just before 10 p.m. Both entered the office while John talked to Jeff. Judy picked up her daughter's notebook and returned to the car parked outside. Minutes later, John came out of the office and opened the rear door on the driver's side to search for something in the vehicle, when suddenly two loud bangs were heard and John collapsed on the parking lot floor. Instantly, the 911 received calls from Judy and the other from Jeff. As routine in such cases, police and medical assistance units arrived at the scene within minutes. Unfortunately, John, 33 years old, had been shot in the back of the head and was declared dead on the scene. Upon interrogating Judy, who was inside the car at the time of the incident, the woman could practically contribute nothing. She stated she was sitting there when her husband came out of the office, opened the back door on the driver's side, and immediately heard two detonations. Judy recounted that her reaction to hearing the shots was to hide, protecting herself with the seat, and when she lifted her head, she only managed to glimpse what seemed to be a man in dark clothing running away from the car. John's wallet was missing, so at first glance the incident seemed to have been a robbery, but the more the scene was analyzed, the more doubts arose in the investigators' minds. No one besides the couple knew they were going to be there, so a series of questions were formulated. Why would someone be looking to commit a random robbery in an industrial area that had no people in circulation at night? If it had been a robbery, why did they first take his life and only then stripped him of his wallet when in plain sight John was wearing a $20,000 gold Rolex and other easily accessible jewelry? Why hadn't the thief searched the pockets as criminals usually do in these kinds of assaults? More questions than answers. 2 bullet casings were found at the scene of the attack. This matched Judy's account of hearing 2 detonations. One of the shots ended John's life almost immediately, and as for the other, there was no official information. With their heads full of questions, the investigators began their work, and of course, the first person they took a statement from was Judy. She claimed that sometime before, her husband had had a heated argument with an employee of his company and identified the man. Beyond this, Judy could not provide anything more of interest beyond what she had said at the scene of the incident. Jeff was also not helpful. He was inside the office, and when he came out upon hearing the detonations, everything was already over. Meanwhile, the authorities contacted the Parker residence, and the call was answered by Christina, who was informed that her stepfather had passed away. With the robbery motive almost ruled out, detectives turned their focus towards John's circle, starting with the allegedly resentful employee. The man confirmed they had a significant argument but said it had been amicably resolved. Moreover, he had an alibi that was investigated and verified. The investigation then expanded to nearly everyone close to the young businessman: business partners, past and current employees, competitors, and even John's friends and family. The only slightly suspicious finding was the interaction between the widow and the company's general manager, but there was no substantial evidence. Judy's demeanor during her husband's funeral was very intriguing. Comments mentioned Judy appearing cheerful and socializing with friends, in stark contrast to the expected mourning behavior. Her ex-husband, the father of her 2 children, was also noted to be comfortably reading a newspaper at the funeral. 4 days after John's murder, Daniel, 15, was brought in for questioning on suspicion of involvement. This suspicion was based on an incident 6 months prior, where police were alerted by gang members that Daniel had paid them to kill his stepfather, John. Although they said they never intended to follow through and had merely kept the money, the police deemed the story implausible, confiscating the money and filing a report without apparent further action. However, given John's eventual murder, investigators revisited Daniel's potential involvement. Under interrogation, Daniel confessed to paying individuals to harm John, intending not to kill but to injure him, like breaking his legs. Despite detaining one of the youths Daniel allegedly negotiated with, he was released due to a solid alibi verified by the investigation. Daniel was released after 9 days due to lack of substantial evidence and his minor status. Later, it was revealed that John had issues with Judy's children, leading to more investigation into Daniel and bringing to light suspicions about Judy's daughter, Christina, 17. Christina denied everything when questioned, and like before, the alleged plan led nowhere. Given that both teenagers had shown a desire to eliminate John, investigators wondered where the money for these schemes was coming from, suspecting Judy as the only possible source. Further inquiries revealed that the relationship between the couple had significantly deteriorated prior to John's death, with at least one of Judy's affairs coming to light. However, sources indicated that John had no intention of leaving his wife and was seeking ways to salvage the relationship. The primary motive for Judy to target her husband appeared to be financial, with detectives discovering John had 2 life insurance policies totaling $1 million. Judy had attempted to claim this money after her husband's death, but the insurance company initially refused to pay, citing the ongoing investigation into his death. The payment was further complicated by John's father, who suspected Judy's involvement in his son's demise. Despite these leads, the case eventually stalled, with only circumstantial evidence available. Life moved on, but significant changes occurred within the Parker family household. Judy was hardly ever home, apparently busy with her new partner, Jeff, John's trusted manager. In her absence, the older siblings took care of their younger half-sisters, Tiffany and Erica. Months later, Judy and Jeff decided to move out of state with John's younger daughters, while Daniel went to live with his biological father. Christina remained in the house, now pregnant and with a boyfriend. Though the investigation had hit a dead end, authorities kept the case open, regularly revisiting the files in hopes of finding something substantial. Their persistence paid off when, following a new lead, they interrogated some schoolmates of Christina and Daniel, who admitted to selling them a firearm. This information led detectives to investigate a piece of family-owned land used by Christina for shooting practice. Upon inspecting the area, investigators indeed found several bullet casings. These findings were analyzed in laboratories, and a significant clue was discovered. The bullet casings matched those from John's crime scene. In 2007, additional information emerged through a colleague, a narcotics officer who had been tracking Christina's ex-boyfriend, involved in a drug case and arrested. Seeking leniency in his case, the ex-boyfriend disclosed a conversation with Judy, in which she mentioned that it was her son Daniel who had fired the shot that ended John's life. Confronted with this information, 21-year-old Christina, linked to the weapon used in the crime, quickly began to talk. She admitted to purchasing the weapon and calling her parents on the night of the incident, asking them to stop by the office under the pretense of picking up forgotten homework. She confessed to being part of a plan to kill John, with her brother Daniel designated as the shooter. When 19-year-old Daniel was located and detained in Arizona, he was presented with the new ballistics evidence and his sister's account. He readily admitted to being the one who shot John, but claimed that Judy, their mother, was the mastermind behind the plot. Daniel disclosed that Judy had forged company checks to gather the necessary funds to hire hitmen to kill John. The amount stolen was reportedly $7,500. However, when the initial plan fell through because the hired individuals took the money without completing the job, Judy allegedly instructed them to purchase the weapon for her son to use instead. Furthermore, Daniel revealed it was Judy's idea to create the pretext for leaving the house that night by making the call about the homework. He stated he shot John once in the head, and the second shot was an accidental discharge while he was rifling through John's pocket for his wallet, following his mother's instructions. He was also told to return home without alerting his younger sisters, a task facilitated by Christina, who kept the girls occupied with television. The siblings claimed their mother had convinced them to commit the crime by alleging they were victims of abuse by John and promising them a better life with more money and freedom. It was also revealed that this was not Judy's first attempt to kill her husband. She had previously tried to poison his food, leading only to a brief hospitalization for John under the guise of food poisoning. By the end of 2007, Christina and Daniel were formally charged with murder and conspiracy. Christina pleaded not guilty to the conspiracy charge and was released on bail several months later in March 2008. Daniel, then 20 years old, pleaded guilty to a conspiracy charge to kill his stepfather and made a deal to admit his guilt and implicate his mother in the crime. In exchange for his cooperation, the prosecution agreed not to charge him with the more serious offense of murder, although he would still face a sentence of 20 to 25 years in prison. Daniel claimed that nearly a year before the incident, when he was 14, his mother and sister first asked him to help kill John. He detailed that his mother gave him and his sister money to buy a pistol, as well as providing him with black clothing, gloves, and a mask to wear on the day of the crime. She also instructed him on what to do to carry out the grim task, including taking a thorough shower upon returning home to eliminate any traces of gunpowder. Ultimately, Judy took responsibility for disposing of the weapon, the clothes worn during the crime, and her husband's wallet. Facing the inevitable in July 2009, 6 years after her husband's death, Judy surrendered to the authorities and agreed to plead guilty to conspiracy to commit murder, acknowledging her role in planning, executing, and covering up the crime. The prosecution requested that she be sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum of 28 years and a maximum of 35 years. Judy, nearing 40, was sentenced to 33 years in prison in late August 2009. The following month, Daniel was sentenced to 23 years. And in early October, Christina, who eventually pleaded guilty to aiding a criminal, received a 5-year sentence. Press reports indicate that Daniel was released in 2017 after participating in a community transition court program and chose to live a low-profile life thereafter. Christina served 4 years of her sentence and was released in 2013, but tragically, she died from a drug overdose shortly after her release. This case is marked by greed. Despite Judy's difficult early life and later success, her insatiable desire for more led her to commit heinous crimes. Sadly, her actions not only destroyed a successful entrepreneur, but also profoundly impacted her 4 children, leading 2 to prison and leaving the younger ones without their father and mother. Once again, dear audience, I thank you for your company. If you haven't subscribed yet, I warmly invite you to do so and become part of this great community. This is Unreal True Crime. Until our next episode, good night.